So again, quantity versus quality. And what we find too is that the NPAs that are created on these projects tend to be very small and not much used biologically. In Melanesia, the customary marine tenure might change in the next kilometer of beach or 500 meters of beach. So it's hard to just lock up 100 kilometers or whatever. That might be ideal biologically. You have to get the cooperation of 10, 20 clans. And that's going to take probably 5 years of negotiation or more. And it's going to be a delicate balance to maintain it. So what we say is that we really need to work within the social-cultural norms of Oceania and not force the Western science-based approach. We've already got a system that works. So the other point is that the communities trust their own knowledge more so than the one they don't really understand, the science.
Francis, you have to speed up.
Okay.
Otherwise you have no time.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to try and speed up here. Why don't you just read that most Okay, this is the other point, is that particular areas of tried and tested approach that's been applied for centuries to conserve nature and associated cultural resources, but the primary indigenous equivalent to long-term or permanent protected areas are sacred sites. Most of them were spatial temporal refugia that were shifted around seasonally, or areas, this area will be closed for a couple of years and moved over here. But a permanent taboo, or permanent taboo is a sacred site basically, a place that has spiritual value. And spirits reside there and respect it, you don't harvest there. And so, but sacred sites are monitored by the ancestors and sanctioned by them. People get sick when they fish there, or worse. So it's an endogenous system of monitoring and enforcement. But the thing is that when it's a science-based system, you come in and you say, oh, biologically, this is the ideal place. It's not because there's a spiritual connection to the people. So it misses the whole link with the sacred sites, and therefore it's less enforceable. You have to often bring the state in to enforce it. And so that's where the problems in enforcement come in. And then what we find is that you take the power away from the chiefs and you put it onto the state, and then you've undermined the chief. You're undermining the traditional system of governance and tenure, taking it away from them. And you're confusing the people, say, who's in charge? So these are some of the issues that we observe. Summary now. TM employs a variety of strategies. So we've got this big toolbox that we're ignoring with the NPAs. And the targets seem a bit ambitious, and that we never seem to get there. Despite 20 years of protected area creation, biodiversity continues to disappear at an accelerated rate. Is it the wrong prescription? We have to recognize the limited capacity of the island governments in monitoring and enforcing NPAs in remote archipelagos. It's very limited human and financial capacity, and very expensive to travel in the archipelagos. So, almost on the summary, we find that we contend that the protected areas tacitly erode and subsume extent traditional taboos and other practices that manage the resources. Basically, they're smothering them and displacing them. And they may lead to the erosion of customary marine tenure if you turn the enforcement over to the state. They don't address the ongoing issues, protected areas don't address the ongoing issues of overfishing, pollution, sedimentation, overdevelopment, strip mining, clear-cut logging, deforestation that continues unabated globally and undermines NPA's biodiversity conservation value. So we need to address these issues first, not last. And the protected areas currently consume nearly all the donors' funds and attention. So we finally got to the recommendations.
Have 1 minute, Francis.
Strengthen and revive. What we'd like to recommend is we strengthen and revive land and marine tenure systems. Let the people decide what strategies best suit them. Don't come in with a preconceived notion that it's going to be a protected area. Support, revive, and strengthen TRM practices and not just create NPAs for administrative ease. One can also measure increases in biodiversity in measures other than in an area. Or like a GIS, something that sits well with the GIS system. Draw more upon community strengths and capacity like traditional governance, traditional knowledge, dataless and cooperative management, and avoid a purely science-based PhD prescription. very last one. Finale, we must be mindful of the long-term impact MPAs are having on Oceania's traditional resource management heritage and legacy. TRM simply needs acknowledgement, support, strengthening, and recognition by donors. The KISS principle, simply support strengthening the revival of TRM, CMT, and traditional governance systems, and we need to stop diverting all resources, all the available resources just to MPAs while eroding TRM. It is one of the greatest legacies of Oceania. It's from the past and it's for the future.
Thanks very much, Francis. So I hope the presentation sort of allowed you to be thinking about this more. So because we've run out, we've gone through for more time. I might just entertain maximum one question. That is, if it's really a burning question, that you can't leave without asking it. Otherwise, I will move to the second subsession. Is it really burning?
It's a little burning to me.
It's a little burning to you. Can you be then very, very quick and short?
He just said that how incredibly diverse Vanuatu is with so many cultures, but then Francis, it's almost...
Please, can you identify yourself?
Randy Freeman from the University of South Pacific.
Okay.
But if there's such diversity, there must be diversity of systems too, where the concept of an MPA might work, and there must be some areas that are urbanized where a traditional solution, given population increase and things, isn't enough, and that you might need the marriage of these things with an MPA. In all the times I've had, I haven't found out where at least there wouldn't be some room to talk with people about the concept.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. The urban area, the peri-urban area, it's a mixed place. It's been, there's people living from different places. The traditional governance system is stressed, and that is the one area where it may be applicable. What we find the problem is that it's being exported to the remote areas as the model, because it kind of works around the peri-urban area. Not in every places. There's a lot of places in the peri-urban where a volunteer comes in, sets it up, he's gone, and it's gone. And it goes back to Tapu chiefs and that sort of thing. And we've seen that enough that we say, well, why waste the time going through this whole thing when that's what it reverts back to as soon as the project support disappears. Basically, look at the root causes and say, okay, it's a traditional governance issue, let's work with that. Maybe they need to build a nakamo, which is a chief's house. A place to meet, a place to drink kava and talk, and bring the factions together to talk. So again, looking at root causes will often deal with issues like leadership disputes, land disputes, those sorts of things. And that's where an outside group can come in and mediate these things as a third party with no vested interest. So no, in respect to your comment, Randy, if there is a space for it, it's urban, peri-urban, but please don't export it to the banks, to the remote areas.
The banks won't give you any funding.
I mean, the Banks Island of Vanuatu, not the World Bank. No.
Okay, so we're not talking about the World Bank there. So we're talking a different bank. So we'll move on to the second session. I'll hand over to, please thank the resource person. After this session, you can ask questions either after this session or onwards. I'll turn over to Phil. I'll ask the resource persons for the second session to come up.
Thanks, Christy. My name is Philip Dearden from the University of Victoria in Canada. This second section is about cultural connections to marine harvesting, marine management. We have 3 papers, and I'm going to invite Anne to come right up here. So, first paper. Here's Anne McDonald, who's going to talk about Satumi and Ama divers in Japan and Korea. Anne.
Good afternoon, everyone. As one of the co-organizers, I feel a little bit responsible for us running out of time here. So I'm going to keep mine as brief as possible But in exchange, I will pass this around. I did write a case study on the Ama divers of Japan, and it's part of a booklet that Dr. Makino and Mario Vieras, who's also one of the, she will moderate the next session, also wrote, and it's looking at community-based management, this idea of cultural and biological diversity that was put together with CBD Secretariat, and it's part of their CBD technical series, Report 61. So if you want to read more, you have this. I'm left-handed, so I'm having a few difficulties here with that. I don't know how many of you yesterday took the time to maybe head up to the coastal area to the festival that was happening. Many of you were probably inside. I'm just going to be sharing photographs with you here. But when we talk about cultural collectivity, my area of research is with the Ama divers on the Japan seacoast of Japan. And they're, according to ethnological historians, some may agree, some may disagree with this, but this theory from history comes that the birthplace of female free divers is Jeju, this island here. So I felt like I was coming to the birthplace, or that I've come to the birthplace of the divers. And when you go through the museum there, if some of you have time, I would suggest that you go there. You will see a wonderful photo exhibit, among other things. But when you go through there, you see a lot of similarities, not only the museum, but the actual living Ama, where the Ama, the Hanyeo from the free divers from Korea, are believed to have been sea gypsies of sorts, and a group of them, it's believed 1,500 years ago, they gradually moved from the Korean peninsula across the islands to southern Japan and broke off into groups. One went around the Pacific coast and the other up the Japan seacoast of Japan. And my area is with the divers on the Japan seacoast. And this is a photo of some of them. But like the Hanyeo in Korea, they are seasonal harvesters, kelp and other seaweeds. This is the previous one is from the island here, and you go to Japan. Very similar scenes that you see, and the same thing of the collective unit, as we've heard Dr. Makino and Francis talk about there's seasons, harvesting times, the limits, the places, sacred zones, taboos, all of that. You see a collective approach and a connectivity that we're seeing from culture to culture. One thing that, this is my last point, and this is one area that hasn't, I believe, been touched on, is how cultural identity, or it's been touched on but only briefly, how cultural identity can play a role as somewhat of a leverage in resource management. And this is a photo from yesterday's festival, where they're showing the clothing of the divers of Korea. And before 1960, it was a different clothing. But when we look at Japan, it's the same kind of story that we see. And what I'm talking about here is how cultural identity has played a sort of a leverage in the collective discussions of technological innovation, the adoption or the rejection of that. And although we're talking very small scale here, when you look at the communities here in Jeju and in Japan, they had discussions, trade-off discussions, and in Japan it's recorded from the Meiji era, from the 1890s onwards, of every time a new technology, first of all it's the goggles, when it's introduced, they have discussions about whether or not to adopt it or not, and how it will impact their harvesting activities and the actual resources. And they take on the goggles, and then they adopt the wetsuit, then they adopt the fins. And when the oxygen tanks in both Korea and in Japan, when they were introduced to the free divers communities, there was a collective no to the adoption of this new technology. And one of the reasons given was it will change our identity as free divers. So we might think of this as not a very sophisticated discussion on trade-offs, etc. But I think that if we can take from this and upscale it and incorporate this in the mainstream, larger scale discussions of technological innovation, whether we adopt it or not, and the trade-off discussions, we could actually find some maybe better solutions, more successful solutions in resource management. Technology, whether we adopt it or not, and that cultural leverage, this might be something that we might like to explore in our Pan-Pacific cultural connectivity discussions. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. A little bit over time, but our second paper is from Hawaii, Native Hawaiian Ecosystem-Based Management by Trisha Kahalani Watson.
Close enough.
Especially the Watson bit, right?
Exactly. I'm going to be very fast Portuguese so if you don't know what that means, it means it's going to be a challenge for me to be very brief, but I am going to be nonetheless. And of course, I can't figure out how to make this work now. Sure. This is the presentation, but I was asked to come and talk about how we managed to integrate indigenous knowledges into all our marine work in Hawaii. And the work we do, I'm being brief, so just take my word for it, we're awesome. We work with fisheries and MPAs, and like many of you, we've seen tremendous challenges not only with local communities, but with indigenous peoples, often flat-out rejection, screaming, yelling, chaining. You've seen it. I'm usually the person stuck on the front line of it. And having gotten tired of constantly being yelled at and then getting calls from my auntie and other things, because all Pacific Islanders tend to be related to somebody who will call and yell at you. I wanted to find ways to be more proactive about making things work towards our common goals. We have a number of posters in the back that talk about our traditional systems and our traditional culture. So I suggest you just pick them up because I'm not going to go through them now. Next. So really, to me as a Native Hawaiian who was raised in my culture and is the daughter of a fisherman and is marrying a fisherman, I was raised understanding that my culture was not that far apart from what conservationists wanted to do. So it really baffled me that we couldn't get together. And I realized that really it was an issue of communication. For one reason, we weren't able to put our targets together, and I realized that because we didn't speak the same language. So what we really emphasize with my company is relationship building. A lot of us are island people. It's not good to fight because chances are the guy you're yelling at, you're going to be standing next to in line at the post office the next day. And it's really uncomfortable when that happens. So building really, really good relationships in an increasingly small world is critical. And don't try to build those relationships when you want something from people. Just build relationships with the communities you're in. So that's really important. And getting data prior to decision making. So a lot of what we do is do focus groups and literature reviews and ecological histories, largely in the Hawaiian language, before decisions are ever made. Before anybody ever comes up with something, before anybody ever comes up with a plan, we take the bare bones mandate. We need to protect 10% of an area, 10% of a watershed, a species target, and do decision making at that point. That's really key because if you've already formed a plan and you've come to the community, chances are somebody's going to get mad and start yelling at you. That's never fun. And again, at that point, what you can do is you can take for example, we have monk seals that people are shooting. I don't know why that's happening in Hawaii. But when the focus was only on the species, a community can't necessarily identify with building a species population. They can't identify with growth. What they can identify with is improving its ocean habitat, or its terrestrial habitat, or its food source. Because as a human population, those are also human welfare targets. So while they may not care if we get the number of monk seals up to 5,000, they certainly care if our fisheries are healthy enough that we have a food source for that species. And it's really important that Indigenous people and communities see the role in your conservation story. So that's something else we do, is we talk to people. Conservation is not about people who come from somewhere else to protect your area. It's our story. At the end of the day, conservation is our thousands upon thousands of year-old story, and it's really important that they see that. So part of what we do is work with education and language programs that revitalize very specific traditional Hawaiian values that are very closely aligned with a conservation ethic. And I totally went the wrong way, that's okay. It was a pretty picture that I think I took over standing on a cliff last week. Okay, a'o aku, a'o mai. Reciprocal learning. To learn from you, to learn from me. I think too often conservationists, particularly scientists, come in and we're like, we want to learn from the native people. The native people have things to teach you as well. I think it's really, really important that everybody understand that every Indigenous person you meet is an expert in something, whatever it may be. And we treat